Hi, this is John from Sharp Mountain Games, and today we're going to review Star Frontiers Alpha Dawn right after the intro. So today we're going to talk about Star Frontiers Alpha Dawn. And this game was only around from, I believe, 1982 to 1985. And for me, it was the first science fiction game that I ever bought and ran. So there's a lot of nostalgia in it for me. However, when you're looking at a game and you're saying, well, should we play this? It has to be more than just nostalgia. I mean, I think that's okay, but let's see how Star Frontiers holds up looking at it with a little bit of a modern eye. And, are there some things maybe that I personally would change? So it actually came with two different games. There was the basic games rules, and you could see the cover. It's very nice. It's kind of, comic book style art. And very nice art here. And the basic game, it starts off with, kind of this little page with almost like a Prince Valiant comic where they give you a little idea of what's going to go on in the game. And then they give you the introduction. And the basic game is very basic. It's really much more like a board game. So you can create your characters. And if you're here watching a Star Frontiers, I think you have an idea of some of the races. We can show you a little bit more of those in the advanced game. In the basic game, there's really only 4 stats. Strength, stamina, they kind of combine them together. Dexterity, intelligence, and personality. And you just use those to roll for everything in the basic game. They were trying to keep it really, really simple. The weapons were kept pretty simple. I don't believe you had any defensive equipment as an option here in the basic game. And they get right into some very simple rules. Again, it's very board gamey at this point that they expect you. They give you a map with it, and they give you little tokens back in the day. And there's a monorail, and they talk about shooting things. Now, one thing I want to point out that I think, I don't know how well this game was really play tested. If you look at the upper left there, they have the weapons table. But you see there's a penalty. Even if you're just at short range, there's a minus 10% penalty. Everything is percentile in Star Frontiers. Medium range, minus 20. Long range, minus 40. These ranges start to get pretty severe, especially Star Frontiers is weighted so that you're kind of an average character. A lot of your starting stats are going to be around 45, 50, maybe 55. So a minus 20 penalty is really, really detrimental for you hitting a target. So here's the truth. I think back in the day, we just ignored those ranges. Just whatever your basic percentage was, that's what it was. Now, I'm not saying that, all right, if you're shooting something at a long or an extreme range, then maybe there should be a penalty. But I think given some basic things, you shouldn't have to be right on top of somebody to hit them. And Star Frontiers loved its grenade bounce charts. They had several of them there. Then it does get a little bit into the equipment here. They give you a much, much bigger equipment list in the full games. And then there's some adventures. And the first one really reads a lot like a choose-your-own-adventure book, where they say, okay, if you do this, and your players want to do that, go read this section. So you are jumping around, as I said, like the old choose-your-own-adventure stories. And I think that's a great way to introduce people to the game. One thing it doesn't take into account is, well, what if your players do something that's not one of the choices? Well, then you just have to wing it. And they give you, you're tracking down some raiders who are agents of the Sathar or the Sathar. I'm not sure how you pronounced it. I know I always said Sathar way back when. And it says, well, what if you want to play it again? Then it gives you a second adventure where you're tracking down a monster, the Hydra. It gives you some idea about designing your own creatures. I always like that illustration there. That fella, he really reminds me a lot of Han Solo. I'm sure that was intentional when the artist was doing his drawings. And talks about how to create your own adventures a little bit. And then suggesting, some rewards and more suggested adventures. So really for this basic game book, which is only about 16, 18 pages, and then they give you a character sheet that you could photocopy and use here in the back, it can get you started. And like I said, I think the only real issues were the ranges on those weapons and maybe the fact that you didn't have any defensive screens. Your starting characters would be pretty brittle. So let's take a look at the advanced, the expanded version. So here's the expanded game rules, which is kind of the advanced, or really the full game, with this just gorgeous classic Larry Elmore cover. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that in terms of old school fantasy art. So here we're into the expanded rules. They assume that, okay, maybe you've played through the basic rules a few times, and let's get rolling. So, what is a role-playing game? All the standard stuff. And how do you make your characters? Now, here it's a little bit different because you have ability checks, but you're also going to have skills. And we'll get into the skills a little bit later. And the races are the Dralicites. I think they're really very known for Star Frontiers. They're kind of blob aliens. And they always did these weird kind of biological things where you could see inside the creature. And they have even survived today. They're in the new Spelljammer as plasmoids. They also have this little 5% lie detection little ability. And, of course, they can stretch themselves all blobby. We have humans, and they're kind of the standard or the main thing. Then you have Rusk, who are insect-like and who are ambidextrous. And they can kind of have this special insight into social skills and social dealings. The Yazirians, again, have survived to today as the Hadozi, and they're kind of flying monkeys. They're maybe a smaller version of Wookiees, and they can glide with those kind of flying squirrel membranes that they have. And they do give you a page on the main villains, the worm-like Sathar. And then we get into skills. So you have to pick an area. Are you more military? Are you more technological? Or are you more biosocial? And the biosocial would kind of include the sciences and medicine. Technological is more engineering. So if you're going to do this as a Star Trek game, are you in security? Are you in engineering? Are you in one of the medicines or sciences? Now, the weapon skills here, it's a little different than the basic game. Instead of just rolling under your dexterity to shoot something, it's 1/2 plus the skill level. And there's a lot of different weapons. We'll talk about that in the equipment section. And then there's technological skills like repairing and robots and computers. And then biosocial skills. The environmental one is really nice. If you want to play a scientist, that's really what you want to pump your skill points into, because that's gives you all the survival things you're going to need for exploring a planet. And you better have a medic along too. That's always a good idea. So that's our skills. And I don't know if the first printing had this, but some of the later printings had a nice chart with all the skills and the base percentages. And then you would just add, for every skill level you had, you add 10% to the chance. Then we really get into movement and we get into the combat things. And you can see there could be a little more art in this old school version. There's some, but maybe not a ton. Now, combat is a lot like you would have in any other role-playing game, except if you look down there on the left column, ranged weapons combat procedure, it's way too long. I mean, it tries to take into account all these little things. If somebody has cover, if somebody's dodging, if something's very small or very large. I just can't see going through that every single time you want to have a combat and you want to run a shot. I think it would be reasonable to say, oh, okay, that's about, maybe that's about 20% harder than normal, or something like that. Have some rougher ideas, 10, 20, 30, of how much harder a particular shot might be, and just use those and, use some common sense. My guess is most people running Star Frontiers were not running through 12 steps every time you want to fire a weapon. It's just a little bit too much. And then you can fire 2 weapons, and there's a Dralicite on the bottom there stretching and beating up those aliens. Then they talk about grenades and melee attacks, and you see there's 9 steps for melee. Probably not going to want to go through all those every time. I think they were trying to be complete, but as I said, I wonder how robustly they play tested that to see that, look, in practice you can't go through all that every single time, or combat's going to take 4 hours. But they do try to address knockouts and stunning and wrestling and things like that. And then we get into the weapons, melee weapons, and you can see a whole lot of different beam and projectile weapons, and I think it's a bit much. The reason I think it's a bit much is because later, when they get into defensive screens, you had to have the exact right defensive screen to counteract whatever the opponent was coming after you with. So if somebody was shooting you with a laser pistol, you needed a certain screen, versus if somebody was coming at you with a knife, it was different. And I suspect they were doing that kind of the same way with Dune, where in Dune they had the certain screens that protected them from laser shots. I just think that the weapons maybe need to be a little streamlined. Most of us watching Star Trek or Star Wars, you want a phaser or a blaster, maybe a heavy blaster, and that's probably all you're going to get into. And then again, more stuff on damage and healing and recovering from wounds. They give you some vehicles and some suggestions on how to run vehicle combat, or if you're in a vehicle. And yep, here's the vehicle combat. And now for flying, and other reviewers have noticed this too, really in Star Frontiers, the regular first set didn't give you spaceship rules for fighting on a spaceship, which seemed to me a kind of an omission, because Star Wars was out at this time, like 5 years. So people really, I think, would have wanted that. And they did put that in their later set, the Nighthawk set. So if you're going to have some spaceship combat with the basic set, you may need to just, codge together some rules. And then they get into creatures here, and they tell you how to create a creature. And they give you some samples, like the Strangler shoots. And they don't give you a huge monster manual here. But I think you could take a lot of these and just reskin them. I mean, they maybe give you 10 or 12 at the most. And here's our equipment. So they have these charts, to help you while you're playing. And then as I said, they really lean into the equipment. A lot of descriptions, ammunition, and standard energy units, and you have to have the right defensive suit. I think here's where it gets really bogged down, and it could be a little bit more streamlined. Another nice piece of Larry Elmore art there in the bottom. And, well, what do you do for computers and robots? And it gives you a little more detail. So you may hear me saying the word detail often. Yeah, Star Frontiers has all the detail. But, again, when I remember running this way back in the day, I think we kind of hand-waved a lot of that, or we didn't necessarily have to get into all of it every single time. There's not a huge background section, but there is one talking about, well, what do these frontier societies look like? And they give you a list of some planets. Not a lot of detail on each one, but they do tell you, where it is, and they give you a nice little map of the frontier, so you could certainly use this as a good starting point. And then time, and a nice section on how to referee. I think for anybody, how to referee, and how to be a good one. And they give you some examples here. How to create an adventure. They give you some suggestions for how to create sci-fi adventures. Here's probably the most important thing, I think, in almost any new rule book. They give you a sample adventure. 1 page here, but really you could get away with, I'd say, a 2-hour session just with this 1 page here and a couple of maps. You have some overland travel. You're finding a crashed spaceship and trying to see what happened to it and if there were any survivors. I've run this exact adventure, before, or variations on it, so I really like it. What do we do for non-player characters? And here's where the book ends. And they kind of have, if you want to hire retainers, I think that's sort of the same as Dungeons & Dragons. Then they give you some reading for fun and ideas. Now, one thing I would say is the reading here, these are a lot of very classic science fiction novels, but they're not always ones that, they'll give you ideas, but they're not always ones that would really be easy to adapt. Star Frontiers is a little bit of a, more rocket ship and strap on your blaster pistol kind of fun science fiction game. So you can read Asimov's Foundation series, but I don't know if that's going to really help you actually find things, to bring directly to your game, because a lot of these stories are more the traditional science fiction rather than adventure fiction. So let's wrap up. So how do you get Star Frontiers? Obviously, it's been out of print since 1985, so you'd have to track down a used copy. There is also a print-on-demand version over at drivethrurpg. Now, that's from WotC, so take that as you will. If you like old-school games, or you have some nostalgia for it, or maybe you had a copy, sure, track it down or purchase another version of it. I think it's a lot of fun, and I do think it's still playable. Some people say, well, these old systems aren't playable. There might be some things you want to adjust or dial down. For example, as I said, I think it's extremely, extremely detailed in terms of its combat and its equipment. And I would definitely, cut that down and hand wave some of that or make it a little bit simpler. Now, if you already have a science fiction or more general system that you like, maybe you're running things with basic role-playing or GURPS or Savage Worlds, you certainly could easily just adapt the races from Star Frontiers and bring them over and run a game in that universe. Nothing says that you can't. So you could do that, basically for free, or you could adapt some other game system to it if you'd like. So I think that Star Frontiers is a lot of fun. I think the races and the species that they use in there are a lot of fun. So it's at least worth reading. And take care. And if you'd like to check out the titles from Sharp Mountain Games, you can see our 2 in-print adventures, The Dwarven Pickup Truck and The Sky Tree, at Amazon, Lulu, or drivethrurpg. You can also check out our digital titles, which include adventures, map packs, new character classes, and character cards, and they're at drivethrurpg or the Roll20 Marketplace. Wherever you like to shop, odds are that we're there. So you know what to do. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. All the links to our products are in the description below. And thanks, and we hope to see you again soon.